true.
Well, there's a tendency, I think, and this comes back to the whole post-Enlightenment kind of way of looking at things, tendency to conflate what we see in the Bible with history, and I really don't think any of it is. We, in this period, we have history in a way that they kind of didn't in the world at that time. Like it didn't exist. People just told stories. You know what I mean? Like what we know as history, what they would teach in universities, is a relatively new invention. So there's a tendency to start looking at these books like that because that's the way we've been trained to think about history. But you know, the people who were writing these books didn't have that concept. They weren't thinking of it.
So the Key of Solomon and the Greater Key of Solomon and the rest of Jerusalem, are they actual books that have a historical origin, or did they just kind of pop up?
I think the oldest versions are like 17th century.
Like it's not as they claim, where it's King Solomon actually wrote it.
Could have.
Is it?
Because I mean, it's so easy for books to be lost or destroyed. You know, so just because we don't have an older copy of this book doesn't mean that an older copy didn't exist at one point. Just
there's like a tradition of Kabbalistic writings having been orally transmitted for ages before they were ever written down as well. So
yeah,
but it's all pretty much hearsay at this point, really.
Plus World War II. I mean, we lost a lot of shit during those bombings. A lot of the source material of this kind of stuff only existed in like a couple of monasteries and a couple of places, and those places were generally invaded by the Germans. I mean, that's why so much of the tradition of Western magic comes out of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Because actually what was happening in France was much more interesting and probably much more intelligent than what those guys were doing, because Mathers was kind of a fuck-up. But after the Germans invaded, they destroyed all that shit. So like we just don't even know. We have a little bit from Pappas and a little bit from Levy. That's about it. But there was probably a great deal more material that existed there at one point in time. So it makes it very difficult to really say anything definitively about that form of history.
So how did the angels fall? Like, if you take the story literally, it's because they found one of the daughters of man, right? Like,
that's the version in the Book of Enoch. Yeah. It's in the Book of Enoch.
Yeah. So, is that metaphorical, or is that like, do they actually get down dirty with like humans, and that's why they?
When I've talked to a couple of spirits who are supposed to tell you how the other spirits fell, they have totally different stories for each individual one. So it's not like consistently they all got to be the same place the same way. Like they wound up in the same place, but they got there in very different cases individually. That's what I've been told, and you know it's very difficult to verify information.
Remember when those Satanists freaked out on you about calling you the KYKE word, whatever?
Yeah.
And then, okay, so when I made the left-hand path poster, I put the Astaroth sigil in the middle of it, and then it was on Facebook, and then some person went on this massive rant about it and was like, the sigil that you're using is one that was sold by like hucksters in markets back in the day, but if you want to work with these not demons but gods, you need to use the real sigils and like all this. I just deleted it.
Yeah.
But, do you think there's any truth to that? Like,
I personally think that the different manifestations of these entities, like it's like I was saying about invoking the same god by different planetary forces, just a little more complicated. Like I think there is that form. The phrase that Crowley pulls up to explain this is the shell, which is from a Kabbalistic idea. It's like if for every large spiritual entity out there, there is the shell, which is essentially the parody or disintegration of it. I mean, he goes into this in Liber 418 with the idea of the four great devils as essentially the parodies of the main religions. So in a way, I think you could see these demons of... I know I keep using this word over and over, but I think that parody is the best way to describe it, because it is essentially sort of like a nasty reflection that contains apparent elements of the thing that it's parodying, but...
like the idea that there's no... like all evil is just a perversion of good.
Right. Like that's central to Crowley. I mean, I think his direct quote is "evil is error," basically. I mean, that's how you wind up with like insane situations. Like you get like Buddhists in Sri Lanka killing Hindus because they could be reincarnated as Buddhists now, and it's much better for them to just like put a bullet in their heads. And that's when you look at the core of Buddhism, that's completely insane. But
well, plus like if mentally you're doing a large working and you're invoking a spirit from the Goetia and you kind of view it in a certain light where it like needs to be controlled and all this stuff, then if someone else is spending a long time working where they're invoking a thing that in their mind they consider a god and stuff, like it seems like you're actually going to end up invoking like two different things anyways. Because like if I were to say I'm invoking Satan, but then in my head I think Satan is Jesus and I'm like praying, you know what I mean? I'm going to be invoking Jesus, right?
Well, even just changing the spelling of names can have a huge impact on the working, especially if you use the traditional, like the Golden Dawn has the Z2 document where like if you're going to invoke an angel, for example, you build your mental picture of the body of that angel out of the letters of its name and those associations. So if you spell it differently, then you're going to be talking to something different completely.
So, well, I always conceive of these things as being kind of like art forms and stuff. So is it possible for like things to kind of like split off, kind of like the same entity to kind of like when society starts changing it and transforming it, do you think it becomes like two separate entities? Like, you know, with Satan, you know, like back in the Middle Ages, they painted him blue for like a long time, like, you know, and to show how separate.
Yeah, I think it evolves. I mean, like that's like we were talking about earlier. I mean, we talked about I mentioned in an earlier talk about how, you know, like you could walk around with a T-shirt with a pentagram on it or something like that, and people probably aren't going to get that upset. But if you walk around with like a swastika, people are gonna get really upset. And I think that's just a perfect example of like this is now like we don't know our devils by their history. We don't know our devils by their cultural. We know our devils by what produces that reaction in people. And right now Hitler is our Satan, right? Probably more has a bigger impact on people and their reactions than actually Satan.
So if you did a magical working like with kind of like a middle like Renaissance or like I don't know exactly historically when this was, but if you like focused kind of on the blue Satan, are you getting like a different entity, do you think? Than,
I would say try and find out. That's what I know. I've said that that's my stock answer, but I mean like I said, I don't like to speculate. I don't like to speculate. I like to approach this in a concrete way, and the only way to really like come to concrete conclusions about this stuff is to try it different ways and find out what happens.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea for magical working. Focus on like a early image of Satan, try to touch with it.
When you think about it, I mean, like there's a lot of Satanists out there right now. Like so, you know, they're not tapped into nothing, but at the same time, the fact that so many of them use these rituals and symbols, and particularly in the Levian Satanists, they're not invested in any kind of spiritual background. They're essentially atheists who don't literally believe in this. Then, you know, but what happens? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, when I was really deeply into Levianism, that was one of the things that started pushing me away from it. Was I would do the rituals as he sort of described them, but then shit kept happening. That was really just weird and not explainable by other stuff. And it was just like not acceptable. I mean, one of the very few times I've ever seen anything like physical happen was I did this destruction ritual, which was very dramatic because the candle that I'd lit and written the name of the person I was going to destroy on just kind of exploded partway through the ritual. And then I was talking to one of my very hardcore atheist Satanist friends, and I was just like, this is a problem for me. You know what I mean? Like, the fact that this happens means that this isn't just psychodrama, like something happened. And she's like, oh no, there must have been like a pocket of air trapped in the candle. It's like, yes, but it happened during the destruction ritual. Yes, I agree, there probably was a pocket of air trapped in the candle, but the timing is significant.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing, the timing and magic. It's like I have a lot of precognitive dreams, and it's like, did my actual magical working make this happen? It's like it's like this kind of.
Well, you're dealing with
preemptive.
entities that exist outside of time. So, like, if the spiritual force that I was talking to wanted to make it clear to me that my destruction ritual had worked, and it did, I never saw that person again, then they would be able to, from a perspective outside of time, go to the candle at the manufacturer, put the air bubble in there, put it on the shelf in the right place at the right time, and make sure that that was the candle that I got when I went to the store. You know what I mean? Like that's easy as shit for them because past and future mean nothing. Even like the analogy I like to use is they can manipulate events like they were objects. In the same way that I would, you know, move my coffee cup around and stuff like that. They have absolutely no problem doing that in a causal sense in the timeline, basically.
So how do you measure how effective your like magical workings are? Like, is there a specific meter? Like, do you
I think that the important thing is to have clear goals and clearly stated goals, and make sure that your goals are stated in such a way that you can tell whether it worked or not, basically.
Okay. So like if you were doing a money work, you could ask for a specific amount of money. If it was 10 cents short, or it's like $20 short.
I make allowances. I actually have a really good story about this. So when I
Or
started.
if it